So I'm at the Red House with Jordan Rainbolt of Native Root. So thank you again for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, so let's again start with, I'm saying again because for those who don't know, I've been figuring out microphone issues. But anyway, we're going to start again with the vision behind Native Root. Mm-hmm. You can take it from there.
Yeah, so Native Root is a concept that I wanted to start that created a platform that was approachable to foods that maybe people aren't very familiar with, but then also digging into the culture in this region and keeping it local while celebrating like what's indigenous to this area. So that's kind of where I wanted to go with it, and luckily it's been great with, you know, not only like creating this exciting concept and like different menus that are you know, playful, but also like with the intention of keeping it regional and celebrating like locality. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And so you're doing this, I guess, how did you get with that? With that being said, there's a couple ways you probably could approach that, but you approach that from the like cuisine angle, right? Mm-hmm. So was that your background? Was that something that you were already interested in?
Yeah, well, so I went to culinary school like years ago. I don't want to date myself, but so you know, it was very structured when you're, you know, working. I worked my way up through restaurants in Kansas City, very chef driven. Still transitioning out of like the old school mindset where it's like the chef's way or the highway. Like if you don't like the menu, get out. And now I think that this industry is transitioning to the idea behind like, well, what can I actually like teach people while they're trying new foods? And so like going back to working in restaurants for so long, it's been that kind of like drive. But now I've been able to approach it with just I don't know. I guess like I had to get out of that mindset and then kind of like reteach myself how to be approachable with menus and styles. Yeah.
Approachable. So what does approachable mean?
Well, it's just, I think a lot of people, I think it's easy to lose like the intention of creating a space where people are able to like ask questions if they don't know what something is. Mm-hmm. And creating like, for example, like a menu or a dish that provokes like that familiar, like, you know, trigger where it's different, like a food or a menu item's different, but it reminds you of something and you can't quite pinpoint it, but it could remind you of like flavors that your grandma made or that you've had like in another, you know, area of the world. And so I think that sparks the approachability side of it, where once people are comfortable with trying something new or newish, then it takes away the intimidation from it. And so it's like, yeah, it's fun to like create menus and like be, you know, creative and whimsical and, you know, have a theme to it, but it goes back to like the root of just, you know, it's just food, you know, and it shouldn't be scary. And
yeah.
I think, yeah. So
100%.
yeah.
All right, so let's talk more about these two aspects. There's the aspect of maybe like things that people haven't tried, maybe things people are less familiar with. Mm. But there's also this historical sort of cultural component, I guess, or almost geographical component. Mm-hmm. Maybe we could just spend a little time on both of those things because they're both kind of interesting. Like,
yeah,
what is the impetus, I guess, behind the effort to expose people to new things, varieties or something or other, like things that they haven't had before.
Yeah. So the the concept of native root kind of hits on like a global meets local concept, and so with that, it's pulling. I'm trying to pull like inspiration from like different cultures, from like cooking styles to and methods to preservation method, and that's something that has been done for like hundreds of years, and so like kind of like narrowing it down to into like where we are in our region, it's trying to keep that inspiration from different cultures, but just hitting on like what grows here, what's actually in season. Not using like fresh tomatoes in February, but just kind of like highlighting what grows here and when it grows here. And so it's kind of, I know we've all heard like seasonal and locality when it comes to like menus and foods, but it's kind of just like re-emphasizing that. So
I think that's really cool.
yeah.
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, the thought that comes to mind is like, I mean, it's like we're always discovering sort of things about our lowly origins that we might not realize or whatever. The ways that our bodies function, ways that our like our bodies interact with the world around us. And I mean, like a thought comes to mind when you talk about that. That's like, I wonder if our bodies metabolize food differently at different times of year. I wonder if like our bodies actually interact with food differently throughout the year.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and like, even like going back to like, pre-colonization and, when there wasn't refrigeration, like there was a lot of method behind like when you would eat or when people would eat what throughout the year, because they had to like, be smart about how they preserved and like what was like what when hunting season was, and that was indicative of when the animals were breeding, and so there was a lot more thought into it and less like you can order anything now from anywhere anytime, so which is, I mean, it's nice that we have that now and we don't have to have so much method behind what we eat, but it's kind of it's still important to, I think it's important to still pay attention to like like just going back to like the regional sources and resources, and also like that goes back to, if you focus on that, that kind of unfolds into supporting like your local like farmers and like getting grains that grow where just in Winston or like outside of Winston, or at least in North Carolina, instead of ordering grains from California. It's just important to like put back into like the resources that we have. So
I really think that's like there's a growing awareness of that right now, which is cool to see that people in Winston are a part of this, and that this is like a growing, I don't know, like awareness. I don't mean to make it sound like charity, I guess, but like, yeah, just maybe an awareness of the importance of maintaining those local resources.
Yeah.
That's very cool. So like,
Yeah.
do you happen to have any of those methods that you can drop? I'm like very curious about some of those methods that we might have forgotten about that were, a part of how we got here.
Yeah. So, well, I think that one of the like going to like preservation, I think that like one of the most approachable or like the easiest way to like kind of hit on that would be like canning, because I think like a lot of people have had, at least like my grandma used to can all the time. She still does. And I think it's just a method that we've all heard about. And so I think hitting on like the preservation technique is important. And is fun to play with. As far as like, I don't know, I don't really get into like dehydrating because also that like I don't have the equipment to do that. But that's it's still fun to read about. So, and you know, but yes, and then cooking styles, like I think it's so cool to like cook outside over like fire where you have to like, you know, it's a more of a challenge to like maintain like your heat source so you don't have like a knob to like turn it. So it's kind of cool to like play with that and experiment with that. It's just like a lot of experimenting right now for me too. Like I am passionate about making things fun for people to try, but I also am very passionate about teaching people different things, whether it's like about ingredients or methods or techniques. And then also while I'm doing that, I'm learning a lot too still. And so, and I think it's important to like recognize that everyone's always learning. So
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I heard the other day on the radio that it was National Can Opener Day. And the reason was apparently the process of canning was invented like 100 years or something before the can opener.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
For like a long time.
The more you know.
Like maybe it was, I don't know if it was, I don't know what old cartoon it might have been, but I feel like I have images in my head of how they used to open cans with those pointed can openers.
Yeah, yeah. I'm picturing like Tom and Jerry, like the tuna fish can.
Yeah. Yeah. Those, and yeah, like with old like Swiss Army knives or different knives or whatever, you have this pointed can opener that would puncture a can top.
Yeah, yeah.
But then you'd have to, apparently they used to come with directions on them that you'd have to hit them with a hammer and all sorts of stuff. And then like 100 years later, they finally came out with a can opener.
Yeah.
Or whatever. So anyway, that was just a weird little.
That's so funny. Yeah,
weird
yeah.
little detail.
I know. I feel like, yeah, obviously like technology is changing all the time, but like just things like that, like, you know, years later, it's like, oh, we can actually like figure out how to make something where you don't have to bash it in. You can just turn it now.
Yeah. Yeah, which is, I mean, like, and us now having never not had can openers, like, I never would have thought that, like, that originally they didn't have, like, a more efficient way to get back into the thing once they closed it up. You know,
Yeah.
that's just
that's true.
I don't know. You would have thought that would have been invented way sooner, I guess, than it was.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
So, what is the most recent sort of thing that you've the thing that you've experimented with and had on your menu that was like kind of exposing people to something new, I guess?
I mean, I'm not like, I haven't like reinvented anything. So what I'm about to say, like people are going to hear it and be like, yeah, I had that like, you know, years ago.
Gotcha.
But I've been, I'm really into, especially like during the summer, I'm really into like compressed fruits, and like pickled fruits. And so, yeah. And like a lot of that is just for flavor. So the menus, I don't like leave it at room temperature and really get like scientific about. So I want people to know that, but yeah, so like pickled items, I think I'm really into, and then like compressed fruits. So, which is, you know, like those vacuum seal bags, like you can get like the food saver from Walmart or whatever, and it like sucks all the air out.
Yeah. I think my parents do a little of that.
Yeah. And so, I have one of those, and I will, like, for example, compressed melon. So like watermelon, I will cut the watermelon into like however thick slices I want it, and I'll vacuum seal it with aromatics like rosemary or basil. I like mint and watermelon a lot. A little bit of vinegar and salt, but no sugar, because it's already sweet. And so like, and it's so porous that it'll absorb like everything that you put with it. And so I'll vacuum seal that, all those flavors together, and then I will let it sit. Or you can put it in like an immersion circulator, like a hot water bath, which is like kind of like expedites the process.
Mm.
But yeah, so compressed.
It's like a
melon.
hot tub for watermelon.
Yeah, super relaxing. No bubble, no jets though.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was literally picturing it like sitting on the edge of this
Just
bath
like a
thing.
bendy straw next to the melon.
Yeah. That's pretty interesting though.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
those are
yeah.
flavors that when you talk, like I wouldn't have put those together. Of course,
Yeah.
I'm not anything near a chef. I'm I'm very far from it, but that's interesting. Like is that you? Is that your art in this? Is like coming is deciding what all these pieces are that go together?
Yeah, well, it's just you know, it's been done before, but whenever I, you know, want to blend the flavors of like something, like going like for that example of like compressed watermelon or like, you know, it's just kind of like themed into whatever menu I'm doing. So for that, I did like I going back to like one of the cultures or like one of the like more history of like this region, like well, Appalachian, and like just side note, before I moved here, I always thought it was Appalachian, but and then I moved here and people were like, it's Appalachian.
It's a debate even among different,
So
people.
going back to like the history of like the Appalachian cooking, it's, you know, they forage like, and still today, like foraging is a big deal, and so that would mean that they would, you know, use the flavors that they found like in the mountains or, you know, in the forest. And so going back to the theme, that when I did the watermelon, it was like I thought like maybe I could do like, I was trying to like play with wording, and I was like, maybe I can do like an Appalachian syrup and like a simple syrup to like put with the watermelon. And then I ended up calling it like mountain syrup to like the Appalachian Mountains or Appalachian Mountains. But so mountain syrup, and basically it was just rosemary, pine, cedar, and then I used like mushroom stems to kind of like add earthiness to it. And so that was the simple. I put all of that into a simple syrup and then used it in the watermelon. So it was kind of like I knew that I wanted those flavors that I was going to call mountain syrup. So I wanted pine and, you know, all these like pine, rosemary, cedar, and then I wanted it to stand out, but I wanted the watermelon to still taste like watermelon.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. So
That's interesting. So I couldn't help but notice that you said cedar in there. Like,
yeah.
I don't know. Like, what does that mean?
So like, you know, the cedar sprigs. We have cedar down here. So cedar is actually more like northern, like Michigan. I really like the flavor. But like the cedar sprigs with, so a little bit of, like the greenery of it, like I don't know what they're called. They're not leaves. They're like the, so
needles or whatever.
The green part of
Yeah.
it. Yeah, the needles. And then part of like the bark. And so, you know, obviously sanitize that, but then like pull that flavor into it. So that's what I used for the cedar.
I didn't know you could do that.
Yeah.
I'm very curious about that.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, we all know what a hamster cage smells like or whatever, or a cedar box. Like,
Unfortunately.
the good side, I mean.
Yeah,
Like
okay.
that sweet red wood. Like,
Oh, yeah.
Is that a
Shavings.
flavor that you get from this stuff, or is it a totally different thing than that?
It's different. You know, I actually I know the smell that you're talking about, like the red bark shavings. And I feel like it's different because a lot of the flavor that like I found comes from like what I use. It's not from like the trunk of the tree or like the like inside.
You're talking about the
wood.
like flaky bark.
Yeah. It's more of like it's more surface
Mm-hmm.
on the surface, and then also like using the greenery to it has
Mm-hmm.
a lot of flavor. So it's just I guess it's just different parts of the tree produce different aroma.
I'm so fascinated by that.
Yeah,
I'd
it's
love to
cool.
experience that because I don't know. I mess with trees a lot. You might have seen my little barn out here. It's
I
about
did, yeah.
80% cedar, and
Oh, that's cool.
yeah, like I love knowing how to utilize. I love knowing how to utilize wood from a more, I don't know, more industrial perspective. I guess not industrial isn't the right word, but like from the perspective of building, from the perspective of knowing which ones you can use for woodworking or
Yeah.
whatever, but and which ones are bug proof and which ones burn better and which ones you can't burn or shouldn't burn inside or whatever,
Yeah.
stuff like that, domestic uses. But well, still food is a domestic use, but the point being I don't know anything about the idea of like using a tree for flavor. That's a
Yeah.
weird concept to me.
Yeah. Yeah, and so but we do that like cinnamon. You've had cinnamon before.
Yeah, I don't know where it comes from.
It's bark.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so it's kind of like crazy because like rosemary is like very similar to pine or like, I mean similar enough like, and so it's kind of like we know what rosemary is, but it's because we're able to get it from, Harris Teeter, and like we see it all the time. So it's kind of similar.
It's sad, really.
Yeah,
When you
yeah.
point that out, like, and I've just started entering into this world of knowing these resources. Like, I go to my friend's house last week, and yeah, they pull like sage out of their garden, their herb
Yeah.
garden, and like give it to me, and they show me all their stuff. And I went over there kind of just to check out their garden and see what they did with theirs, and learn for next year or whatever. And yeah, I mean, I hope more and more people. I think more and more people, especially like I don't know, in our demographic, are getting interested in exactly that. But it's like there's a sadness, I guess. There's a part that's it's understandable that we created a society that's super convenient and that like people like to do that, like to have the convenience of it all. But there's something really exciting about doing that, about like interacting with these plants in a way that utilizes them as a resource and knows how to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, and that actually like I was listening to, do you know who Sean Sherman is?
Mm-mm.
So he is a Native American chef, and his tribe is he's Lakota, and so he is in the Michigan area, or sorry, Minnesota. And so he's in Minnesota, and he did this TED talk about how going back to when resources were more abundant and they didn't have like the option of like convenience and weren't so like picky and choosy with what they ate what they could find,
Yeah.
unless it was poisonous, and then they would send like the lowest man on the totem pole to test it. But so there was this abundance of food because the resources were being used. And he did this TED talk where he was talking about how now we throw things away that used to be food. Like we like don't know what it is, so we kind of trash it instead of learning about it. And so what you just said kind of reminded me of that, where it's just, we eat lettuce because we know what it is, and we like romaine lettuce. We know what it is, and we see it every day. We see it everywhere every day, and or like if you go out to like the grocery store, you can find it anywhere.
Yeah.
But if we didn't have it in the grocery store, would we eat it? Probably not. Like it's still a plant, and so it's just kind of like going back to trying to use the more resources we use, the more availability there is, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
In multiple ways, I can kind of wrap my head around that. And so is that philosophy in there part of this whole, the aspect of native root that you are able to kind of expose people to maybe new exposure to new things. Is that also about? Is some of that in there, like kind of maybe? Like, I guess what I'm wondering is, are we talking about things that people just like didn't know you could eat? Are we talking about things that people have never heard of before, or things that have been lost to time? Like, what is the criteria, I guess, for that aspect of that part of the
Yeah.
philosophy?
Yeah. So, kind of it like for native root, when I make menus, when I create the menus and I'm like brainstorming, I try to use, like, I still use ingredients and items that are, used all the time, like onions and tomatoes and like, whatever else. But I also try to highlight the more underrated products. So, like, for example, I love using greens, and obviously, greens are used all the way or all the time here because we're in the South. But I like using like dandelion and like marigold greens and sweet potato leaves. Even though the season's shorter for those, but just kind of like, you know, things that people don't think, it's not their first option to use, if that makes sense. So I try to highlight that. And then things like, for example, one of the menus that I did, I do this full moon dinner, like this moon dinner at Winston Junction Market. So we do it like once a month. It's a course dinner, going back to like the indigenous roots of our region. And so each menu is based on what moon it is. And so the last moon that we did, it was the corn moon. And so the corn moon, I wanted to like marble like that without being obnoxious. I wanted to like, have corn like throughout the menu. And, I didn't grow up eating corn husk. Like I know that like, tamale, like I've had tamales and, wrapped and like things wrapped in the husk, which is really cool because that's also like going back to a traditional method of steaming. But I've never eaten it. And so things like that I try to experiment with of like, yeah, everyone knows what corn husk is, but I wonder what else I could do with it because we throw it away. And then like the corn silk that's under the husk. Yeah, like it's edible, but we just don't think to eat it.
I never would have thought to eat that.
Yeah, me neither. Like growing up, my mom would have me like, my job when we had grilled corn on the cob was to shuck all the corn, and then I would do it over like an Aldi's like grocery bag.
Yeah.
And then just like throw it away. So that's kind of like where I try to also be creative and provoke like curiosity of like, well, I've never thought about like, doing candied corn silk before, but it's really fun. It's really cool. And so those are kind of things that I try to do.
Man, that is so cool. That is so interesting. Like, and it's so obvious. Something like that should be so obvious, you would think. I think I have an assumption a lot of the time that if we don't have a tradition of eating it, it must not be edible. And like, so my fascination recently has become pumpkins, and I've always grown up with the understanding that there's just like pumpkins that you can't eat or whatever, and that turns out to not necessarily like it's not like they kill you or whatever. It's just like they might be really tough things, and you might have to make them into a soup or whatever, and maybe you don't eat the skin or whatever, but yeah, I mean, like the clear distinction, I guess, if you eat the light orange ones, but all the other ones are just for decoration.
Yeah.
That's just like a bad habit on our part, more so than a truth, it seems.
Yeah. Yeah. Like the bigger ones are less flavor and they're a little tougher. So just, they're for jack-o'-lanterns, and then throw them away when they rot.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of sad.
Yeah.
I think some stat I heard was like, I think it's like in upwards of like 70 or 80% of the pumpkins we grow they're used for decoration,
Yeah.
rather than eating.
Yeah.
Do you ever play with those?
Yeah. So Sam from Apple and Green. So he Apple and Green is like this urban farm behind West Salem Public House
Yeah.
off of Green Street. And so he runs that farm. And the first time I tried to, after like moving to Winston and connecting with him and other farmers, he started telling me about this, like these pumpkins and like this like yellow summer squash that got really big because he didn't pick it in time. It was, or like maybe I think they were out of town or something, and so like it overgrew. And squash will grow until it's harvest. Like it doesn't stop like when it's ideal, you know. And so, but what happens is people don't buy that. And so they would, when that happened, he would like the farm would donate that to like places like soup kitchens or like other places around town that would take them. And so he gave me some of those, and he's like, don't pay for them, like I don't sell these, but just go home and experiment with them. And so when the squash grows bigger, the seeds grow bigger, like the seed pods grow bigger. And you know, and then it gets a little, the meat, like the flesh gets a little tougher, and the skin's tougher, and so like, you know, people don't want to buy it. So I went home and I made like this, I made a soup out of it. I think I did like a chilled soup because I think it was like a last July or something. And I like roasted the seeds because the seeds were bigger, so they're easier to shell. And it was so good. Like it was so like it held its like integrity because it was firmer. And then it's just, it wasn't as sweet, but it had like a savory, like more like like substantial like flavor of squash. It was really cool. And so that's, yeah, so it's fun to figure out. I think it's really exciting to figure out what I can do with things that people don't want to buy. So that was really cool.
I think that's an awesome, angle, and like,
Yeah.
and it just makes good sense. I suppose there's like some of these, I think of them as like Boy Scout rules, like because there's like I had cucumbers this year, and I believe with the cucumber plant in particular, I think if you have one that truly matures to seed, unlike some plants, I think the cucumber plant will start to kind of die because it feels like it's done its job, whereas other ones will up, like they're different things or whatever, will up their, they lose a fruit or whatever, and they will up their production like crazy trying to like get one on the, trying to make sure that they carry on the species.
Yeah.
And sorry, that was a little convoluted. I said the Boy Scout thing because like they used to make generic rules for Boy Scouts that were a little misleading for what they were.
Oh yeah.
Like that bamboo smoke is poisonous. That used to be one.
Yeah.
When really it's just that bamboo, if you burn it, it will explode. So you got little bombs to play with.
Yeah.
So, you tell the kids what they need to hear
Yeah.
to get the product they want.
Yeah.
So I wonder if there's some of that goes on with fruits, with vegetables and stuff, with squash even. Like if there's some stuff that we've picked up along the way that maybe we don't fully understand why we do it, but if it's just like whatever. It's just like with cucumber, maybe it's just to keep the plant alive for longer or some stupid shit like that.
Yeah, I think it's like I think it's a lot of that, and then I think that also like the food industry is like just it's in every industry, but like specifically the food industry it's gone through phases. So like it's like, in the 70s and 80s, like 60s, 70s, it was like not the most glamorous chef. It was embarrassing to be a cook or a chef because it was just like kind of like, this service that was done that for people that didn't want to cook. And so
you said the 70s and 80s?
60s, 70s.
60s, 70s? Interesting.
Yeah. And then 80s kind of like started, not in this country, but like in the UK and like France, started to be like that chef driven, like, you know, I told you to not salt that steak, and like throws the frying pan. And so like that was kind of like that era. And then I think now, like skipping like a few decades, now we're hitting this point, or at least the last 10 years even actually, but we're hitting this point where it's glamorized and like in a different way of like not just, you know, Gordon Ramsay, Marco Pure White chef, where it's like, you know, this grungy industry, like moving from that, now it's like this glamorized industry, and like having shows like on the Food Network and recipe books that like people are buying. It create like, and it's a good thing and it's exciting, but now there's like this hype to try like these new recipes that you see on TV or in books. And I think that when people read the specific ingredient list of like how to recreate this recipe that they saw in this book or on TV, they go to the grocery store with their list and they're like, okay, the yellow squash is here. They're all large squash though. My recipe says a medium squash. So I have to go to a different store. And I'm not making fun of anyone, but I think that that's kind of like also why we're like today, everyone's so picky with like what they buy and what they find.
Man, you're on to something there. Like I'm an example of this for sure. And for me, it's a lack of understanding. Yeah. It's like a lack of knowing. It's a lack of feeling competent and confident with like food. And like, so occasionally when, and they're, this is funny. This has never been brought up before. Occasionally, I will do, occasionally when I have some spare money, I'll do HelloFresh. And in my head, I keep thinking in the middle of this episode, I'm going to cut to a HelloFresh commercial, like a fake one. That would be.
This is sponsored by.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Anyway, I've got all these jokes playing around in my head that are just taking up time. So HelloFresh, I do it occasionally, and I am like terrified of stepping away from the exact order that it tells me to do things. This also has to do, I think, with my nature as a bit of a rule follower. When I know that there are rules, when I know that like I'm totally comfortable being in the realm of creativity. And if you gave me some ingredients and said, try to make these work together, maybe I could. But when you give me a piece of paper that says follow this precisely, I'm like imprisoned by that. I cannot get away from following it exactly as it tells me to. And part of that is just not knowing. If I were to go into my own realm and do something out of order, I have the assumption that I'm going to just like, it's all going to go amok.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's okay because like for me, I'm the same way when it comes to building like IKEA furniture. And like, I won't like, you know, some people can just kind of like have the sheet there, like the instructions there, and, you know, refer to them like every once in a while if they get stuck. But I'm like watching it, and like while I'm building, I'm like, oh shoot, wrong screw. It's the same type of screw. It's just not color coded. And so like I'm like the same way, and I think that's human nature, and I think that's okay. That's just how we are and how we're built. But I think going back to like when you said it's just the lack of like maybe like not knowing as much about a product or like a produce or like a type of food, that's kind of like what I'm trying to create like a hype about or a buzz about. Like, you know, like I want people to be comfortable to be curious about things that I find myself curious about. So my hope is like if someone would if somebody has a menu that I like, you know, going back to like the corn husk, and they see like what, like fried, like, or like the corn silk, like what, candied corn silk, what is that? I would, and my hope would be for them to go and experiment with it.
Yeah.
And I think that that's like kind of, you know, where I have a lot of joy and passion. Is it's really fun to create new things, but it's really humbling and satisfying to see people, like, to hear people ask questions about things that they don't know, and then also like to try things that they've never tried. And so like, yeah, you know, going back to like not knowing about it, that's okay.
Yeah,
But,
for sure.
yeah.
But like, so that's interesting because that's a different angle than what I'm aware of with what you're doing. Because it sounds like, are you also as interested in kind of helping other people be equipped to do their own, do their own takes on what you do,
Yeah, I mean,
cooking and stuff?
yeah, I think yeah, I want people to, I want to, I learned what I know today, and I'm still constantly learning. Again, going back to like everyone's constantly learning, but I wasn't born with the knowledge that I have about food.
Right.
Like, I had people throughout my life, different chefs, different mentors, that took time to teach me and to make sure that I understood certain things so that I could go off on my own and be successful with things that I wanted to try. And so, you know, you don't have to be a chef to be passionate about trying to do something or to, you know, experiment. And so like, that's why I love when people ask questions. I love when people, you know, if someone came up and asked me for a recipe, I would give it to them because I think it's awesome.
Yeah.
You know, that's what it's all about.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like that is shown through a lot of what you're saying. It sounds like a lot more interest in, like the philosophy behind what you're doing, rather than the sort of. You don't sound like somebody who's like, I want to have a monopoly on candy corn silk.
Yeah.
You know,
It's mine.
it's all mine. Like, you can't know my secrets or whatever. Like,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
sound a lot more open than that.
Yeah. Yeah, because yeah, nothing's new. You know, like like the inspiration that I draw from, I breed, you know, I pull from like other chefs or other, you know, moms from other cultures that have grown up like cooking their style of food. And I think that it's just, if that didn't exist, then it would be a sad world.
Yeah.
You know, like no matter what we're talking about, I think, you know, it's important to share knowledge, and it's important to lift people up no matter what they're doing. And so, yeah, that's why I try to make people feel comfortable to ask questions. Like, you know,
I love that.
Yeah. And that goes back to like being approachable, like the approachability and, you know, authenticity. And so,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think that's great. So, like, speaking of kind of learning from others, like, I guess I didn't really pick up on where your bio and all this is from. Where are you originally from?
So I'm from I grew up in Kansas. I grew up on the Kansas side, a city called Olathe. And once so I went to high school there. Once I graduated, I moved to the Missouri side, to Kansas City, and that's kind of where like the downtown like scene is and all these restaurants are. So after graduating high school, I moved to Missouri and worked throughout Kansas City.
Okay, and is that where a lot of this stuff started?
Yeah. Yeah. I went to culinary school in Kansas in Johnson County. And then I did my apprenticeship while I lived there, or while I was working there. And so not after graduating high school, after graduating college, I moved to Missouri.
So let me ask you this.
Yeah.
switch. Okay, first, I'm fascinated by Gordon Ramsay. Like,
Who isn't?
can't get enough of it sometimes.
Yeah,
I like to cut on the Kitchen Nightmares one occasionally.
yeah, yeah.
And I also am a fan of, I'm like that and Bar Rescue are like some guilty pleasures of mine because there's something so difficult about having a vision and like the part that is believable, the thing that we seems to be what we experience in that show is that we really believe in the idea of the master and the unrealized vision, and the master kind of helping bring that unrealized vision into its perfection and stuff. And
Yeah.
there's something like emotional about it and all this stuff. But yeah, like he definitely represents that idea of like a master chef that like can't be argued with.
Yeah.
And part of what you've been talking about this whole time is sort of like the culture of that shifting
Yeah.
to something else. What's that all about? Like how should I understand that, maybe the necessity or the explanation of that?
Yeah. So I think that is how the restaurant / food industry has been for a long time now, is like, whoever the leader is, it's the end all be all, like the final word, no questions asked unless, like it was just, it was a little more intimidating to ask questions. And so, but I think that today it's more of, I lost my train of thought. It's more of a Gordon. Okay, so Gordon Ramsay. Yeah, it's Kitchen Nightmares. It's kind of like, also entertainment, and so it's a little exaggerated. But I think that that was like how restaurants were, and now it's more, it's changing in a way that like, add the glamour to it, add the today's show at 7:00 when someone's making cupcakes and, super smiley. And so it's super like, like you're into it. And it's easier to ask questions today. And also like if it's harder to it's harder to be like that in that tyrant role. Like it's harder to hold that throne or like that crown, if that makes sense. Like you have to fight harder for that than you do to just humble yourself and allow like people to correct you or to ask questions, and that's just kind of like a human thing.
Yeah. Do you think that's something, is that something specifically happening in that industry, or is that like consistent with sort of a wider phenomenon?
I think it's happening in the industry, just because like it's changing. Like like it's a lot of different things. Of like now, people don't have to go to a nice restaurant in order to enjoy like a meal out. Like there are like food trucks now, there are food stands that are really good, there are food halls that are like coming back. And so I think that before it was kind of like, a nice dinner out would be like one of those restaurants where there's no salt and pepper on the table. And like if you order a medium rare steak and it comes back as is delivered as rare, don't send it back, because the chef will come out and like like make an appearance. But yeah, so I think that we have more options now today. I think people are more aware of like, good food doesn't mean, not that there's anything wrong with white tablecloth restaurants, because that is like, it's all about the occasion. Like if you want that, then it's still there. But yeah, I think people are more aware that like it doesn't have to be that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so too.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's really playing with my mind, because I think that it is more wide reaching than that. And I don't quite know what that means. And I guess the reason my mind is kind of playing with a lot of things. the food truck thing, I think I definitely see. I see that. I see all these shifts in all these different industries, and like I get the sense right now that I've said before on here that I think people's relationship with music too is a lot different than it used to be, and sometimes I think it is like, I don't know, maybe it's like, maybe you could think of the difference between a music festival versus going to like an opera house, and
Yeah.
not to see opera, but like where a songwriter I really like, I saw for the first time in like a opera house or like a big theater, and I feel like maybe people are questioning whether or not like those certain type of concert experiences compare to like the most massive versions of them. And I don't know, I guess there's this part of me that worries or thinks that maybe some of the pageantry of some of our old models of these crafts, of these like art forms, maybe that's just for some reason that's really hard for me to wrap my head around. Something changed, and like people relate to them differently now, and they
Yeah.
want different things, and I don't think I know what that always means, that they want
Yeah.
different things.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't, well, I think it's hard. I mean, I don't think anyone knows what that means, because it's like it's it is a different it's different to look at like this, like even like the example of music. I'm glad you brought that up, because like look at like how much music's changed, even like the different titles, like what rock and roll, like it wasn't just like a like style of music. It was kind of like this whole like brand of like, cut off t-shirts and like throwing the guitar around there, like,
Like a
and
culture.
then like the culture. Yeah. And I was driving the other day and I heard like classic rock, like the top list of like classic rock today, and I felt so old because
I know.
the Killers was like number 6, and I'm like, the
Oh,
Killers is classic rock.
that's scary.
I was like, but yeah, so it's just like it's the way that we see things changes what they are.
Yeah.
And so we control what has changed and how, but, or I guess like not individually but collectively.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think what that reveals to me sometimes is I'm outside of that now. I'm not like, I think at one point we were part of the generation that maybe persuaded that the most, and I don't like, yeah, there's a lot that persuades culture now, or that dominates culture now, that I'm not even aware of. And so
Yeah.
as somebody who's trying to like find where, as one of many people trying to figure out where I exist in a marketplace for creativity these days, in the form of music in particular, it's kind of like, it's the Wild West. It's like, I don't know what the rules are. I don't know I don't know where that community necessarily exists now. So it's just kind of a different time. And yeah, and side note, yeah, I listen to country. I listen to like the classic country radio station a lot, and like all the shit I grew up listening to, like, is on there now, and
Yeah.
it's just kind of weird. It's like I'm in my 30s.
Yeah.
I'm not like 60. Like, this is weird.
Yeah, I also grew up on country, and my mom was a big Alabama fan,
Oh,
and like Hank Williams, and then so I guess what was around the time that I was growing up was, yeah, my mom was playing that, but also like on the radio was like 90s country, like Shania Twain and I don't know, Tim McGraw and Faith Hill and all these people. And now, like, yeah, also another list that I heard was like Kenny Chesney and Tim McGraw are like, now considered classic country, when I was growing up, and I'm sure when you were growing up too, it was like Hank Williams Senior, or like Hank Williams, I think, is just like, and it's crazy to think like what. Yeah, Tanya Tucker, like,
yeah.
yeah,
It's confusing, and I guess it's like when we were young, when I was a kid, if you ask, like, if I was trying to pinpoint classic country, I probably would have said people like Willie Nelson and Johnny Cash, like outlaw country.
Yeah.
That was stuff my grandfather liked. And so we're talking about a whole skip of a generation, you
Yeah.
know, like he's my grandfather. It's not like he was my dad.
Yeah.
But I'm like, I'm not old enough to be a grandfather right now. And stuff I grew up listening to is like showing up in the realms of classic. Like it kind of,
Yeah.
things got really, it went way
They're
fast.
shaving time off.
Yeah, like by a lot.
Yeah,
Now
by
something,
a lot, yeah.
it used to be something that was like 40 years old. It's classic.
Yeah.
Now it's 15 years
Yeah.
old. Like that's a change.
Yeah.
That's a pretty big change.
Yeah, it is. It's hard to keep up with.
Yeah. What was your, what 90s country, what was your favorite stuff?
I liked 90s country. Alan Jackson. I obviously loved Shania Twain.
I thought
she was more like country pop though.
since
I
she
think.
she was the first one that came to that you mentioned. I was like, I bet you're a Shania person.
Yeah. She's just she had a lot of like hits, and so she has like those songs that are fun to sing too.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, Alan Jackson. Who else? Garth Brooks.
Oh hell yeah.
Yeah. You know, I actually learned. You know the Thunder Rolls.
Uh-huh.
That was actually first done by Tanya Tucker.
Really?
Yeah, but she didn't like what's the not publish it? Is it publish it if you're talking about music?
That's one of the
I think
things.
she didn't like own it. So she didn't publish it, so it wasn't her song, but she wrote it and she like did it first.
Wow.
And then she never like did anything with it. So Garth like was like, "Hey, can I get that?"
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I
That's
just learned
cool.
that. Yeah.
I wonder what that sounds like or sounded like, or I don't know if it ever existed.
I don't know. I didn't know if it was if there's a copy.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, same era. I grew up on all that stuff. Alan Jackson. Did you know Alan Jackson had a daughter that went to Wake?
No.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yep, he did.
Yeah.
He's fun.
Dang.
There's a story about Alan Jackson where he was playing on CMT or something, and he and his band were playing, and they were asking him to play to a pre-recorded track, and he was like real insulted by that because that wasn't his style. But they were insisting on it because it was live TV or whatever. So so what he did was they went ahead and kind of did the pony act or whatever. I think he just sang to a pre-recorded track. I think he did sing live, but he told his drummer, just don't take any drumsticks out there with you. And he was like, all right. And he did. And he went out on stage without drumsticks and just pretended to play drums the whole time.
Oh, wow.
Cymbals didn't move. Drums
Yeah.
weren't hit. And he was on TV with no drumsticks. And they were kind of making a mockery of the
Wow.
whole thing.
Yeah.
It was very like country punk rock, I
Yeah.
guess, as far as I was concerned.
Dang, that's so funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I would be insulted too. Like
Yeah.
I don't know. Like that's funny.
You know Coulter Wall? He's well, since Shania is, Canadian,
Yeah.
Coulter Wall is kind of like our modern Shania Twain, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
When you hear Coulter Wall, you'll probably agree with me that that's a hilarious thing to say because he's the furthest thing you could imagine from Shania Twain. But Shania, yeah, she to me, her and like Keith Urban.
Yeah.
We like as a kid, I was like perplexed by them because I was like, what does it mean? Like, I still get hung up on this idea that art reflects your true identity. And I get hung up on the idea that your true identity is sort of like almost objective. It's almost like it's not something that you have any choice about.
Yeah.
And Keith Urban and Shania Twain Keith Urban's from Australia and Shania Twain from Canada. And it's like, in my mind, it didn't make sense to me that they would be attracted to country music that was like Nashville music.
Yeah. That's a good point.
I always thought that was so weird.
Yeah. Yeah, that is weird. It's like yeah, cuz Keith Urban I guess like I read once that his dad was very into country and that's how he got into country music. But it was a different style of country music in Australia in that time. And so he started listening to American country music and then like became more inspired. So, but that's a good point. It's like, kind of reaching out to what you're not, it's harder because like you actually have to like pursue it hard. Like they had to pursue it harder because it wasn't like, you know, arm's reach. They weren't in Alabama like in the 90s where it was like, you know, so easy to like, you know, be around country music or
Yeah.
Nashville. But yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, in
Yeah.
Texas and Wyoming and all that too, like Garth Brooks and Brooks and Dunn, a lot of
Yeah.
those
Oh,
guys
Brooks and
actually
Dunn, yeah.
like they started their careers playing rodeos. And that was like
Yeah.
they traveled around with rodeos doing that, and it was kind of how they made names in those markets out there.
Yeah.
You know, to me, that is very obvious. I think George Strait might have been a part of that crowd too, all the Texas boys.
Yeah.
And yeah, to me, that's very. It makes a lot of good sense, and that's like their identity. Like George, that really was their identity, was to be a part of that crowd. I'm so. It's when I learned Keith Urban was Australian or whatever, it's like I had this idea. Maybe it's cynicism. Maybe it's not that important. But I had this thought that was like, it seems to me like somebody just, I don't know. It seems to me like a lot of these country guys, they pick that as an identity and then go put on the costume and say, you know, make me into a country star and I'll wear the
Yeah.
hat and I'll do the stuff. And I think that happens in all of music. I think like that's what happens in every genre of music. People kind of put on the costume and act it out, and we believe it. We just
Yeah.
like believe the story. But there's some kind of conflict for me in my head about like, what does that mean about identity if it's just I don't know, if it's only like surface level.
Yeah.
Then,
Yeah.
then what is it?
That's true. Well, I think like the audience, like the consumer, you know, we like fall for it, but I think at the same time kind of like demand it, right? Because
Yeah.
it's like, you know, I don't know how, like, especially like maybe today's different, but especially like in the 80s and 90s or like, you know, I guess 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, but I don't know how many people would really like fall for. What if Keith Urban was like this like country singer next to like Hank Sr., like Hank Williams? Like I wonder if it wouldn't have been like as accepted. Like, ah, he's not a cowboy. But then like you see like these guys like George Strait that is from Texas, like, you know, the cowboy hat and the Garth the cowboy hat, like all these like different. So it's like if you have the hat on and you sing about rodeo and like about certain things, that's kind of like, yeah, we fall for it, but then it's like
You are right.
we're satisfied then. It's like, yeah, okay.
It's the cult. Yeah, you're seeing. Yeah, and then when you don't see that, like if you see what comes, when you see acts who are now like really hated by more traditional country people, like Florida Georgia Line or somebody like that, you know, like they don't hold themselves to that standard. And there's all these new people, and now, especially now that there's all these new flavors within modern country that are
Yeah.
really far removed from those traditions. That's the whole beef people have with it, is they do still have that standard. They do still want the cowboy hat. That's why Jason Aldean doesn't get the hatred that,
Yeah.
you know, like that's one reason
Yeah.
that Jason Aldean doesn't get the hatred that say Luke Bryan does. Also, Luke Bryan just
Oh, that's
really,
true.
really, really sucks. But,
Yeah.
but, you know, Jason Aldean plays the old school rules. Luke Bryan doesn't.
Yeah. That's true.
I think you're exactly right.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think Darius Rucker has a phenomenal voice. I like Darius Rucker, but I kind of heard, like, when he, like, I remember hearing when he went from Hootie, you know, to being this, like, country singer. Now he wears a cowboy hat, but he
Yeah.
didn't before.
Yeah.
And yeah, I remember like people were a little pissed, like, you know, like he's like, isn't he pop? Like, isn't he like, you know? But yeah, it was we weren't like it wasn't like he wasn't being assessed by like the way he could sing. He was being assessed by his image.
Yeah.
You know, so
There were a handful of artists within that decade. It was pretty spread apart, but within that decade, I think I remember Jewel, Bon Jovi, Darius Rucker, and it seems like I'm missing somebody.
Would Sheryl Crow be in there?
Sheryl Crow, yeah, I'd probably include her and Kid
Yeah.
Rock too.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
all these, I think everybody kind of saw how much money Nashville was making compared to other genres of music, and I think Nashville was really popping off at the time. Like they were really popping off at the time, and I think, so I think a lot of people just said, well, all right, I'm gonna act like an adult instead of like a partier, and I'm gonna make that CMT money for 2 years.
Yeah,
See how that
exactly.
goes.
Yeah.
Darius Rucker though, he's actually like stayed in that world,
Yeah.
which is interesting. Is he from South Carolina or somewhere?
I don't know.
Maybe he really does identify with the whole Southern identity and just didn't. Maybe Hootie was a different time period for him.
Yeah. I don't remember where he's from, but yeah.
Well, I wouldn't have guessed that you were like a country fan.
I know.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. It's like my go-to road trip music. It's like, I love Alabama. Actually, I saw Alabama in concert.
Really?
Yeah. I think it was like, I don't know. I might butcher the year, but I think it wasn't that long ago. Like maybe 2017.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
So maybe
it was
on
like,
their like one of their last tours or
yeah, and they still sound like great. It was an outdoor concert, outdoor venue called Starlight Theater in Kansas City, and yeah, it was they were awesome.
Hell
but
yeah.
Alabama, I love it. I love.
Yeah, I liked Alabama, but I didn't connect with them quite as much. Like my country band of choice was Diamond Rio when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Really liked them. I still really like them.
Yeah, they're good.
But my number one in country was probably Tim McGraw. He
Yeah.
just, some of his albums really, I don't know. They're like Brooks and Dunn were there too. Brooks and Dunn was my first ever concert as a human.
Oh,
And
really?
it was them and, I think it was them and Reba. Yeah.
Oh.
It was around the time
Yeah, that'd be a good concert.
they put out that If You See Him song or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Anywho, Tim McGraw was my dude. But yeah, I mean, I all that shit was my shit.
I do love Tim McGraw.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That Tim McGraw and the Dance Hall Doctors, you know this
Oh,
album?
yeah.
My
Yeah.
God, that's my favorite one.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Dang. Taking me back. Reminiscing. Yeah.
Speaking of, I think Alan Jackson is doing his like farewell tour. I think he's venturing out on that now.
I heard that.
Yeah.
I think that not yet, right? Does he start that?
Might be coming up.
Yeah, coming
right?
up. Yeah.
You gonna
I
go
don't
to
know.
that?
I don't know.
I
don't know. I've seen him live a long time ago. I was a kid.
Really?
But yeah. My parents are from Florida, so we saw him down in Florida. But yeah, I don't know how he would be now.
Yeah.
But if it's his last, then I guess why not?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you listened to Midland?
No.
You should check out Midland. Maybe they're the most like awesome sort of throwback vibes but still modern. They're like a country trio, modern. Texas boys look like anyway. They got mustache and whatnot.
Yeah.
Do rhinestones and all that shit. They look like Alan Jackson kind of. They look like ratty, dirty Pool Hall Alan Jackson knockoffs.
Yeah.
And but their songs are super clever. They sound like the 90s a lot of the time. A lot of great wordplay. And yeah, it's like probably the most enjoyable modern country stuff that I've come across. Like that's actually legit country.
They're called modern.
Midland.
I'll have to remember that.
When I'm editing this, I'll probably hit you up and say, "Hey, I just heard me tell you to listen to Midland. Here's they are," or whatever.
Yeah, I know. As soon as I get out, I'm gonna like put it in my phone. Yeah, I love. I like the rasp. So I know it's not like country. It's more of like, I don't know, like they're kind of like very thin lines for me between like a certain type of like country vibe and like folk, but then like bluegrass. But well, I guess bluegrass isn't like percussions, right? That's kind of like what the...
Well, it's a different thing altogether, kind of, yeah. But I mean, they're all part of the same tradition, but
Yeah.
it's slightly different.
Branched
But
off.
I'm hearing maybe talking like Americana or roots are words
Yeah.
that you and I were talking about this about my music. Those are words that I assume other people know, but we all like. It sounds to me like when we're talking about music that sounds Southern but isn't like Nashville country.
Yeah.
I think it's either it's one of those things.
One of
It's like
those, yeah.
Americana roots or folk
Yeah.
usually.
Yeah. Like, have you heard of the Steel Drivers?
Oh yeah.
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 So would they be considered Americana?
This will be fun. We can unpack these words a little bit. According to me, I would consider them. I would consider them Americana. I could also consider them newgrass, which is a term that is like, so. So what you have is like mountain old time music. You have mountain music and old time music or whatever. Old time is like old ass songs that have just been passed down from generation to generation, like probably since the 19th century in America. So then in like the when was it 30s or 40s I think, was it the 1930s or 40s? Bluegrass was invented based on banjo music. So prior to that, fiddle drove a lot of this stuff. But anyway, banjo music, three-finger banjo, bluegrass is invented. That was like the invention of jazz or something.
Okay.
Old time music all of a sudden had this like fast-paced, amazing, fast, like exciting thing, and we saw that in Nashville on TV and shit. And that kind of branched off from country. So old time then became, there was like a bluegrass path, there was a country path.
Oh, okay.
Country western, and that was, I think, a term that we used to describe like stuff from Tennessee, stuff from Texas, like all this southern farmy rancher shit that went all the way to California.
Yeah.
And it's been, since I think the 90s or the 2000s is I think when people started using terms like roots and Americana. Folk, I suppose we're talking about like the 60s might have been when that was popularized. And I think of folk as like really like almost like academic term. Like it is common folk music. It's common person's music. It's like
Oh, yeah.
no industry, no whatever. It's just like a dude and a guitar.
Yeah.
And like simple vocabulary. So anyway, Americana and roots, I think, were terms that started getting used in like 2000s ish, and I think that was as country was becoming more popular and growing and becoming more like made for the tastes of the masses instead of like the few that were traditionalists about it. I think then like roots started meaning like, oh well, it sounds like it's got roots in old styles of music or whatever. Americana is another term I use kind of academically that means like it reflects a culture or something like that.
Yeah.
But that's so vague. It's like the same idea as roots, and those things can be done by a folk musician, but they can all be country. Like
Yeah.
all these things are part of the same river. They just have slightly different personalities to them. I think of roots as like maybe like having more edge to it. I think of Americana as like not being one thing. I think Americana applies to all forms of music that has sort of traditional roots that tie it to country in some way.
Yeah.
And folk I just think of as like acoustic and soft.
Oh.
That was like a pretty long music rant.
No, I'm glad you did that. Yeah, because like it's always so blurred, and people just kind of like, I think, I mean, like I guess I'll just speak for myself. Sometimes I just like go off like rule of thumb that I hear where it's like, oh yeah, it's bluegrass because there's no percussion, or like it's just like this because of this, and like, but I like how you explained it, and I get like what you mean by it's all part of the same like river, but it's just like there are a few like streams that like branch off from the same main body, but
that's kind of the idea. And lastly, the newgrass thing, because you'd asked about the steel drivers. And the steel drivers, when I say edge, I think they have some of this edge, and their songs are so fucking cool. but also with bluegrass, I think technically all the bluegrass songs already exist, and they're all part of traditional music. So I think technically people don't write new bluegrass songs.
Okay.
It's kind of like saying, it's kind of like in jazz. People think of Coltrane as like jazz or something, but Coltrane and Thelonious Monk and those guys are like bebop musicians that were writing their own shit, and they had knowledge about what's called the American Songbook. Same kind of story with bluegrass. Like, bluegrass guys play old ass mountain songs. If you write songs that sound like bluegrass, I call that newgrass or roots.
Okay.
I don't call it necessarily bluegrass.
Okay. That makes sense.
I don't think everybody abides by that rule, but that's just how I understand it.
Yeah. No, that's easier to understand. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. It's like you need to write a book with like different like chapters of it.
The music rule book.
Yeah.
Jesus. Yeah, what a silly bunch of nonsense. Well, I guess I should probably stop keeping you so long. Question. So what's on the horizon for you? Like what's your next event? And this might come out later, like in a couple weeks. So if you have any events from now to like the end of October that you might want to talk about, that would be fine.
Yeah. So I'm going to start this dinner series that will take place on Apple and Green, and it's called the Fireweed Dinner Series. And so fireweed is a wild flower that kind of like resembles the first sign of colder weather. And so wild flower that grows in like forests and the mountains and up north. It's very also in the Smokies, but like very prominent in like Alaska and Michigan and Minnesota. So it's all over. But yeah, so the dinner series, the Fireweed dinner series is going to be resembling like the seasonal transition, and the idea behind that is it's going to be like a family style menu made from what Apple and Green Farm has available, which will be really cool because people will like see like where it grows while they see like how it's been processed, and like, you know, whatever like I do, like however I cook it, that it'll be kind of like that, like, you know, poetic, like before it's processed while it's still growing, and then like, you know, what you can turn into it, turn it into. But yeah, so dinner series, and then just like a lot of cool things happening like for fall. It's my favorite time of year, so I love like, you know, still having like the last of the summer like produce, and still being able to kind of use the fall winter stuff. So yeah, so I guess I don't know if I answered your question, but yeah,
you got those
on the
up.
horizon, yeah, Fireweed dinner series, and then the moon dinners with Winston Junction Market. We have a few left, and then yeah, that's pretty much it. I wing most of my life, so
hell yeah,
just like not a planner, but I'm working on it. I'm better at like, you know, organizing myself, but yeah.
That's awesome. Well,
Yeah.
I'll try to catch some of that.
That'd be cool.
That'll be awesome.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for doing this. It was super fun to talk to you. So I look forward to. I actually haven't got to check out your operation yet. Like, I haven't got to do the food thing yet. So I'll look forward to that opportunity.
Oh, that'll be so. Yeah, I hope to see you soon then. Like, just also just be on the lookout on Insta. Like, I'm trying to like create this like calendar on like the website and Instagram, so that it's more than like a week or two out, so people can kind of like look at like 2 months in advance and see like what we're doing. So yeah,
awesome.
Yeah.
Well,
but
cool.
Yeah, just a, you know, insight on that.
Perfect. All right. Well, I guess that's where we'll leave it. So
Yeah.
Jordan, thank you again, and yeah, I guess I'll plan to see you soon then.
Cool. Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Good.